coming to you direct from the nerve center of the galaxy's greatest comic. This is the 2000 AD ThrillCast.
Borag Thung Earthlets, and welcome to the latest episode of the 2000 AD ThrillCast Lockdown Tapes. I am your host, as always, the publicity droid Maltjar. On this episode, we're talking to Anthony Williams, who is an artist who got his break drawing Dread 2000 AD, but was an artist that had already had the beginnings of his career at Marvel UK on licensed properties like Action Force and the Real Ghostbusters and things like that. He's somebody who was very much one of the 90s mainstays of the prog. So he worked on Dread, he worked on the reboot of Robohunter, Cola Commandos, Babe Race 2000, Big Dave. But he's gone on to a really interesting career, which shows the possibility of the use of comic book art and comic book storytelling outside of actual published physical comic books. So it was really interesting to be able to chat to him about how his career has evolved over the past few decades. He's also known for drawing things like the VCs between, I think, 2002 and 2006. He's no stranger to the prog, but it was really great to be able to dig into his experience of the changing face of the industry, but also industries outside of comic books. I hope you enjoy that one. In terms of what's out this week, the Tammy and Ginty special that we interviewed the two writers for, Rachel Smith and Ramsey, is out this week. Very, very enjoyable collection. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. 2 stories in this one, with some bonus feature content, and that's available from 2000 AD's webshop and apps. 48 pages and well worth your time. We're going to be looking at other collections, more deep dives, don't worry, they haven't gone away, and more creators from the galaxy's greatest comics in future episodes. But in the meantime, sit back, relax, and let's hear from Anthony Williams about his career in comic books. Cool. Well, thank you very much for agreeing to chat. I'm particularly excited because just as your time at 2000 AD began, so did my time at 2000 AD began as a regular reader. So your Dread in particular has kind of imprinted itself on my brain a little bit. But we'll come on to that stuff in a bit. The beginning is always the best place to start. So just give us an idea of your background and how you came to be interested in comics in the first place.
Oh, okay. I started reading comics. I literally can't remember not reading comics, and to the detriment of everything else in my life. I think the first comic I read was something called Play Hour and Robin. I remember the name of it. I remember very little else of it. I hope that's indicative of how old I was at the time when I was reading it, but it was. I think it was kind of like the Rupert the Bear kind of thing. You had a picture and you had the words underneath, and I think I was only looking at the pictures, but getting the gist of the story. So that was the beginning of it, and then graduated on to the sort of like the classic British humour comics, so like Core and Whizzer and Chips, and all of those, and then. Obviously, as I matured, I moved on to Warlord and Battle and assorted others that I would pick up depending on how much I could badger my parents into buying them or blag some pocket money to get them or whatever. 2000 AD was but no, Action was the first. I mean, you must have heard this story from so many different comic creators. Action was the first thing that was like, holy crap, this is completely different. Absolutely love that. Totally changed my perspective on what comics should be. I actually bought a couple of old issues of Warlord a couple of years back just out of curiosity, and it made me realize just how lost in time those comics were, But so to see something like Action and then to see 2000 AD following on from that. I can remember, I can very, very clearly remember buying the first issue of 2000 AD and being blown away by that. And then I went, my parents, it seemed like a huge move at the time. We moved all of about 10 miles, but it meant I had to go to a different comprehensive school, even primary. And I met a kid on one of my first days there who was a massive comic book fan of US comics, which I at that point had no sort of like knowledge of. I was vaguely aware of them, but I was, I don't think they were in my local newsagent, not even the Marvel UK reprints. So then I'd never done anything by half measure. So then I was just buying everything of those. It was around about the time the Captain Britain comic launched, and I thought that was the cream of creme de la creme of comics at the time. Looking back, I realized maybe it wasn't, but you know, I mean, I have very fond memories, and they had the beautiful black and white reprints in there. John Buscema, Fantastic Four. I think it was Nick Fury, Steranko stuff. I mean, you know, so it was really pretty exciting stuff. So that, along with 2000 AD, was effectively, you know, what I was mainlining on a regular basis. So I don't know when I decided I was going to be a comic book artist, but I had already decided probably about the age of 12. So like I said earlier, to the detriment of everything else in my life, schoolwork, social life, interacting with my family, I just drew and drew and drew. Then let's see, it was about the age of 16, I started boarding the National Express from Swansea and heading up to London with a cunning plan, which was to turn up in London and guilt people into talking to me. So I literally would get a Victoria coach station with a stack of, this is going to age me now, with a stack of 2p coins and 10p coins, go to a phone box. And I'm wondering how I got the numbers now. It's probably from fanzines or something like that. And then I would ring. I rang. It was Fleetway at the time, or was it IPC? I can't remember. But I'd ring them, and I'd ring Marvel. And Marvel were always great, Marvel UK, and they would take pity on me. And there's this country boy walking through Bayswater, trying to find the Marvel offices. I ended up walking into was obviously a sweatshop with loads and loads of women sitting at sewing machines making God knows what. So I guess that probably wasn't the Marvel offices, but I found it eventually.
I don't know. It's a hell of a metaphor for comics.
I know, that is true, actually. Yes, yeah. For the next 20 years of my life, yeah, God, yeah. That's why. Damn, I never saw that. Yeah. But no, they were great. They were fantastic. I mean, like I say, I was 16 years old. I really wasn't very good. I was enthusiastic, but I really wasn't very good. And I'm trying to think. I'm trying to remember the name. Tim Hampson was the editor in chief at Marvel UK then. But Steve Dillon was in the office delivering artwork, and I remember he had him sit down with me and walk me through my work, which at the time kind of blew my mind, I must admit. And thinking back to it, still blows my mind. And then obviously I didn't walk out with a gig, but I did. I was invigorated just by how well I was treated by them. I don't think they quite realised what they'd done by doing that, though, because every 6 months I would do this again, and I would come up and I would go to the Fleetway offices, and I would go to the Marvel offices, and they would give me my allotted 45 minutes. Then I'd go to Dark They Were and Golden Eyed and spend all the money I'd saved on comics, and then go back on the coach again. But eventually I moved to, I'll try and speed this up a little bit. Eventually I moved to London to go to art college. And 2 years into my 3-year course, funnily enough, I went to the Marvel UK offices, and by sheer good luck, I think Kev Hopgood had moved off Action Force that very morning, and Richard Starkey's the editor, basically would have taken anybody. and I got my first gig. So that was my very first job, and then and obviously it was plain sailing from there on in.
We'll dig into quite a few bits of this in slightly more detail. One of the things that I'm particularly interested in is when you sent over some information about your career. One of the things you raised was your kind of gateway drug was British humour comics.
Mm-hmm.
And I looking at your style, looking at the kind of facial expressions of your characters, particularly in that kind of initial period on Dread where you're doing things like the spitting contest, like that. I'm interested to see whether there is a direct line between the kind of stuff that got you hooked on comics, which I assume is like Baxendale and things like that.
I've never really overanalyzed it myself, but I think you're spot on in that everything. One thing I am aware is everything that I do, I can't help but bring a level of caricature and absurd to it, even when I've tried to draw in a very, very realistic style. And I actually, in the past, I think I've come unstuck when I've tried to play against it and tried to go and try to become too lean too far towards the photorealism, etc. And I think where my strengths have always lain up, the sort of thing you're talking about is the slight theatre of the absurd of something. And you're talking about that was a Garth Ennis story, wasn't it? That I came across the artwork the other day because, again, funnily enough, like everybody else, with all the time I've got, you go through a lot of old shit that you got stacked up, and I was thinking, how did I even know? Where does it come from? Where you know how to do all the muscle reflex for somebody to be really hoiking one up to the back of your throat before you let it go. But I was very proud of it. I thought I got that pretty much spot on there. So yeah, no, I think long answer was that. Short answer, yeah, you are right. I mean, definite lineage there.
It's fascinating just how many artists who go on to work in the 80s and 90s and into the 2000s do have that same lineage. You can see it in the way that their faces are caricatured and constructed. So I'm wondering, and I was going to save chat about the evolution of your style until later, but I guess we can come back to it. But you worked on the Real Ghostbusters. That was one of your earliest gigs, and that kind of seemed to fit perfectly a comic book that was based on a cartoon, which itself was a cartoony, not satirization, but relation of actual people. So it seems the perfect thing for you to
I think you're right, and I think it's one of the reasons why I got that from very early on. I was able to literally work week in, week out, was because there was a book like that came out, and we sold massive numbers on that. I mean, it was like every fortnight 200,000 copies.
I was one of them.
And I think I must have been on it for about 4 years, something like that. And it's but it was a real opportunity, I think, to grow as an artist, something like that. I think it's a very exaggerated sort of story you're telling, I mean, with the way the characters are acting and interacting. So I enjoyed that a lot. I think again, there was a bit inside of me at the time sort of thinking, like everybody, I want to be drawing Judge Dredd, I want to be drawing superheroes. But I do think something like that is very, it very much plays to my style. I've been having fun over the last couple of months, just going back and literally recreating work that I did previously, going all the way back to the very beginning. And Ghostbusters is one of those ones on my list, which I'm going to find a cover that I did and just redo it, because I would love to see what I would do myself. I'd like to see what I would do with it now, so with a few more tools than I had back then.
I mean, licensed comics are a really interesting sort of boom in the 80s where you do have I mean, it's Marvel UK. You've got the Transformers comic, you've got the Real Ghostbusters, things like Action Force, Galaxy Rangers, all this, that, you know. I'm wondering about a point you made just a moment ago about being able to learn in print on a book where the visual language already exists. So, you know, there must have been, I'm sure, like a character Bible.
Yeah, there was, yeah, and again, that for somebody at the stage of career I was at, and the other guys who were on it, you know, because you had Andy Lanning on there and Brian Williamson, you know, we were all doing this together, and we all shared a studio as well. But the advantage of something like that was we had some very strong underpinnings for what we were doing, which we could lean on, which would allow us to grow as artists, I think, you know. So I again, you know, I do think, looking back, that was, you know, to have something like that in the formative years, I think was, you know, tremendously helpful for me to learn to grow as an artist.
Looking at the kind of things you were reading as a kid, what did you envisage a career in comics would be? Were you making your own comics?
I was, yeah. They were appalling pastiches, homages of other people's comics. I had a character called the Bat who dispensed justice in a sort of dark blue suit. It was, you know, I must go back to it at some point. I think there's a diamond in the rough in there. But I was, yeah, I was like, you know, I think I think the storytelling aspect was something that I really, really loved, and I still love. I you know, I have stories now that I want to be drawing and I want to be telling, and I've always had this thing though where I've been aware or always wanted to have an audience for it. It's not just something I wanted to sit down and just do it for myself. So with the idea that it probably just shows a monstrous ego at play, but the idea that, you know, you're putting something out there and people can actually enjoy it and can respond to it, even if you're not there when they're actually responding to it. Just, you know, just the thought that you're doing it for a reason, it's always motivated me, and I think it motivated me from very early on that, you know, and I think that was one of the primary reasons why I love comics. It's something where you get such an opportunity to be able to, on a very, very fast turnaround, to be able to communicate with people.
What did your family, what did your teachers think about this obsession? Because I remember when I was a teenager and obsessed with comic books and making my own comic books, it was always yes, you know, very good. But what about your schoolwork? Were you kind of neglectful of all things apart from comic books?
I was more than neglectful. I was neglectful of going to school. Not that my parents knew about that until I was well into that, and I finally got rumbled. But they were amazingly supportive, though, I have to say. I mean, they always encouraged me. There's a strong line of art running through my family. Plus, both my parents were very much get out and do what you want to do in life. My dad went away to sea at 14. My mum came over from Australia when she was 19 to marry my dad, and then he probably went back to sea again. But by the way, they had a long and happy marriage. I didn't want that to come out the way it may have sounded then. But you know, so they had that sort of spirit anyway. You know, in the 1950s, they were like that. I mean, I know my grandmother was a great artist. My godfather used to draw for Punch back in the, you know, about 1920, 1930. So I think they understood. And you know, I mean, I never got anything other than support from them, which was great. I mean, obviously, I disappointed them often by failing miserably at everything else, but they were, you know, I mean, they were happy with the end result, and I think the faith they showed in me getting there is, you know, something that I will always be appreciative of.
With the kind of, I suppose, the ladder of comics at that point, in British history. Where, you start off with kids comics, you move on to the kind of action orientated weekly, and then before you know it, you're practically mainlining American comics. I mean, I've said it before on the podcast. I'm always intrigued by where people's comic reading habits, so, and what that has done to the way they perceive comics, the way they produce comics, the kind of comics that they create. Because I mean, you went on to Marvel and DC. I mean, I think you described the guy as literally your dealer. He would send you your fix on a regular basis.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
It was that. Moving on to American comics, was that a revelatory moment, or did it merely confirm to you?
Well, it was because 2000 AD was really, for me that was the first, like I said, the first big sea change in my thinking about what comics could be. Because again, looking back, I think one of the reasons is because of the respect they had for their audience, and this felt like I was reading something with more heft to it than the really disposable stuff that I'd been reading up to that point, and it's the edge of cynicism was tremendously refreshing. But and I think going on to Marvel comics and then I mean, I did in 1976, 77. I was reading reprints because I was hunting down I'd go to old bookshops and buy stacks of the Marvel black and white reprints, the UK ones. With some kid crying at home because their mum had just thrown the collection out, and I'm the happiest guy around because I've just bought them all. But those were reprinting stories from the from the late 60s, early 70s Marvel, which were those are really good stories as well. I mean, it was you had some of the weird Englehart stuff and all that. So I think that's why those comics were such a change for me, and that's what really drove me forward then. That really, thinking about it, that's when I was really engaged with the idea that I want to do this. So and I do think it's a respect for your audience as much as anything. The British comics were all great and all fantastic, but they are there to serve a purpose of just week in, week out, get them in, get them out. 2000 AD did and still do a Herculean task of getting a weekly comic out that has the quality that it has now. Frankly, I don't know how you guys do it. I really don't. But
robots, mostly robots.
I had heard, yeah.
I love this idea of a 16-year-old you, Dick Whittington like, off to London where the streets are paved with comic book gold. Is that kind of the arrogance of youth? I'm
one of those people who never realizes you're not supposed to do something. It's genuinely. I mean, I just didn't think that I shouldn't do something like that, so I just did it, and I think it served me well through life, to be perfectly honest. I mean, you fall flat on your face quite a bit by doing that. It's they're going back to that turning up at the age of 16, and then I said about going to London and going to college. It was a very, very short 6 years between that first visit and getting that first job. So so there's a certain amount of stubbornness, I think, that drives me forward.
With that first work, when you got it, I'm sure you were absolutely elated, as any young person looking to break into the industry would be. But was it a bit of a dose of reality when it came to actually doing it, or did that kind of confidence just continue through? I'll step back. I don't think it was confidence necessarily. I think it's stubbornness. I think there's a difference between the two. I was bricking it. But look, I mean, being honest, I wasn't very good. I really wasn't. But it was a really interesting time. 1987, when I started, the people who started, I mean, I've said, about the guys I was sharing a studio with.
like Kev Hopgood's was doing stuff. But then the same year or very close to, you had Liam Sharp, you had Brian Hitch, you had Doug Braithwaite. It was an interesting sort of like next generation of artists coming through, and I wasn't an idiot. I could look at the stuff I was doing and look at the stuff they was doing, and knew I had quite a lot of work. So you probably asked him about be nice, be good, or be on time, and try and be two of those things. So I tried to be on time and be nice as much as I could, and hope that the other would come along. So that was the situation I found myself in.
It's very easy, I think, particularly in this kind of mid-90s, where you start getting the you already had the British invasion at this point of that first generation of 2000 AD creators going over to American comics. And it's very easy to view this period always through a 2000 AD lens, because it's been very influential. But there was a whole other part of the industry that was servicing Marvel UK. Even just that part of the industry, the names you've mentioned already coming through, one or two of them did do stuff for 2000 AD, including yourself. Tell me about that kind of community at the time.
It was great. I mean, I've got to say, it was. I have nothing but good memories looking back to sort of like the late 80s, early 90s, when everybody would get together. They would. I mentioned to you before we started recording that I'd watched the Dave Gibbons, Brian Boll, and Mick McMahon interview that you did, and it really resonated with me because they were talking about their pub that they would go to, and we would go to the Valiant Trooper. There was the Coal Hole that we would go to. A lot of comic artists, writers, everybody getting together, and for me, it was like, again, being like the country bumpkin coming, and this is again, this is true of all of them as well. But you come to the big city, it's being able to meet up with people who are like minds. I was so energized by it. I mean, it was incredibly exciting. It was. I absolutely loved it, and I loved all the people I worked with. For me, it was a great time. Really, really. And that was down to the people, the editors as well. Everybody was young, everybody was enjoying themselves most of the time. It was a good time to be breaking in.
It's interesting to look at somebody like Richard Starkings, who has a huge impact on comics, not just as somebody who's been an editor and a creator, but also through to his lettering. Are you kind of aware of the impact of these personalities beyond just them giving you work? Because I'm always interested to how people feel at.
I know. I get what you're saying. It is a really interesting thing because, when they're your drinking buddies, it's different. When and the thing is, we would, because everybody was trying to do this at the same time. And as you get deeper into your own career, if they we're all moving at different paces, but you still got that same sense of everybody moving on and developing, either some people leaving comics and going and doing other things. So it's more a sense of colleagues and people that But to your point, going back to saying about somebody like Dave Gibbons, that I remember the first time I met him at my first convention when I was a professional, I was tongue-tied, and it was like, oh my God, it's Dave Gibbons. It was like, this person exists. But so whereas now I know Dave, and I'm no longer tongue-tied when I'm talking. Not that it makes any difference, because you'd never let me get a word in edgeways anyway. But I think there is, there's a level of respect you have for the creators you grow up, enjoying yourself, and and there's a certain mystique, I think, when the artwork just appears in a published comic and you go, holy crap, the human hands did that? I can't believe that. Now, unfortunately, sometimes looking back when you're a little older, you realize that maybe things weren't quite as amazing as you thought they were. But I think when we were all growing and developing together, I think it feels slightly different. I met Richard at San Diego last year, and it's just nice to catch up with him. But you're right. I mean, he's shaped a part of the industry in a pretty dramatic way.
Let's talk a little bit about the titles you're working on. So, Real Ghostbusters and Action Force. As a British GI Joe, it was wonderfully anodyne as a strip. I wanted to get your feelings on and memories of working on that title at the time.
I only did a couple of issues of Action Force, and I mean, I don't think it would have been on my reading list, but it was. And also, I mean, to be fair, I saw how the first story or the second story that I drew got how it was plotted, because I was sitting in the pub when it happened. So I think it was kind of like, let's just get this stuff out there. But I also, let's not skip over a couple of other gems from the early days in my career, which was Mask, which I did, and best of all, Supernaturals, which was the weirdest toy ever in existence. But and I was doing full color art in that. Really beautiful. Oh my God, why were people giving me work? I was I was looking at that. It's like I look like I did it with a junior watercolor set, but it was those were the sort of, those comics were selling at the time, and it was they were again great to learn on the job under pressure. But I'm trying to think where. Oh yeah, so to your point, yeah, there was a lot of stuff that I drew that I wouldn't necessarily say were instant classics.
Tell me a little bit about your process at the time and how you were evolving over this period. Over what I guess, I don't think I'm being rude to call it an apprenticeship.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. It was. I mean, the thing I always found really interesting is, like I said to you, it was 6 years of banging on doors. It was 4 years before then of drawing pages of sequential art, like everybody goes through. So from the age of, let's say, 10, 11 to 22, I was getting better, but I was getting better in increments. And then from those first 2 years, I look at how my work changed, and that's when I really learned how to draw, to be perfectly honest, because I never have regrets about anything. But one thing that would have been wonderful would have been to have more of a grounding in the underpinnings of good draftsmanship, which I had to learn on the job, which means sometimes you draw a lot of stuff, you don't know why you're drawing it, but you've seen another artist do it, so you're going to do it. And I think those first two or 3 years, especially working, with a lot of very talented people around me, you learn a lot, and it's a hard boot camp, but I think it's the best way to learn is just pressure of the job, and and the love of it as well.
Because when I look at your work, particularly as it evolved, I see influences crop. I've always talked about the humor comics, but it seems that over time, your confidence in what you could achieve grew, because there's a kind of streamlining, particularly in your storytelling. Tell me a little bit about how you feel your storytelling evolved, whether this was a gradual process, whether there were eureka moments. Was there a page you were working on where you were like, you know what, I've got this done?
I think fairly early on in my professional career, I started getting reasonable confidence in the storytelling. I mean, I'll go back to what I said, that the actual drawing ability and the underpinnings of that were weak. But I think when it came to telling a story, I so enjoyed doing that. I mean, it is, I mean, you are the little movie director when you're doing it, and I always enjoyed that. But I also the it's the sense that you're inhabiting the characters when you're actually putting them into the story, and you're doing this and choosing how the story is going to flow. That, I think, I actually learned a lot quicker than I did, like I say, I mean, the actual the sort of like the finish and the polished skills. So that I can remember on 2000 AD in particular. I mean, I can remember a wonderful sense that things were coming together when I did. I mean, not the first Dread, because there was a lot of pressure. I mean, my God, it was my first Dread. I mean, I was quaking in my boots. But when I started doing a few things like Cola Commandos, which Steve Parkhouse wrote, and then Robohunter, which was Mark Miller. I think that's when I started coming into my own, and that was more me coming across there. That's when the technical skills were beginning to kick in as well, and I was feeling very confident about experimenting. And just this. I think I really enjoyed the high wire act then as well, because 2000 AD allows you to basically to draw in a way that pretty much no other comic is going to allow you to draw. I mean, if you go and work for Marvel or DC, yes, you can do your interpretation of a character, but you're not going to be able to start, pasting spaghetti and macaroni onto the page if it's a good effect. So, but I think on 2000 AD you can, so that was really exciting. I remember, learning how to use markers, how to use colored pencils, how to, use an airbrush, etc. And it was that's when it started to feel like it was all coming together.
You got into working for 2000 AD through a very particular route. Do you want to tell us how that came about?
Yeah, how do you know the route I got into 2000 AD? I was, well, I mean, I assume we're talking about the same route, so we'll find out. But yeah, so I mean, I was sharing a studio with a bunch of people in Brixton, which was Kev Hopgood, Andy Lanning, Brian Williamson, and John Tomlinson, and all of whom are wonderful, wonderful people. And I need to see them again soon, because I haven't seen them for years. But I think it was that John pinned my art up on the wall and was badgering Richard Burton all the time and saying, if you need somebody, use this guy, use this guy, use this guy. And I think, John became the persistence for me, I think. And I ended up getting I think I got that. I've just realised a pattern here, because I got my first Action Force job because Kev couldn't do it or had moved on to something else. And I believe I got my first Dread job because Liam couldn't do it or moved on to something else. So basically I was always there to save the day. So that's pretty much how I remember it. Is that how you know it?
Yeah, pretty much. It's that kind of network of people introducing people, and and how that bleeds into 2000 AD history. Because, like I said, there was a whole community and a whole industry outside of 2000 AD. They weren't necessarily all geared towards the prog. But when you started, you went straight onto Dread.
Yeah. Go straight into the top. Yeah.
And on a PJ Maybe story as well.
Well, why not? It's your standard Dread story, isn't it?
And I mean, and after immediately after Necropolis as well. So it's that kind of triple, quadruple whammy right there. I mean, that must have been pretty intimidating, particularly considering that Liam up until that point had he done all of PJ?
He had, yes.
Yeah.
It was. It was. That was the thing. I mean, yes, and I remember all the fear and trepidation that came along with it for all the reasons you just said. But I genuinely do. I mean, and it was difficult, but the one, like I say, the one thing, it goes back to what I was saying about being, stubbornly moving forward, is that I've never not delivered on my deadlines. So I had to do it, and faults and all, it had to be done, and there were good bits in there. There are bits that I do like about it. There are bits, less so, but that's, so I think, why not? I mean, just start with something like that. And it's funny, the toughest character I've ever had to draw in my life, and to this very day, is Dredd. I really, really struggle with Dredd.
Is it the complexity of the uniform?
That's part of it, but part of it is there are ideal. Certain artists have created their ideal Dredds. I did grow up reading, Brian Bolland and Mick McMahon, both of whom did astonishing versions of a character that was so fundamentally different from each other. And it's and I've never felt I ever found my Dredd. That was the thing that frustrated me a lot, which is why if you look through all my Dredds, it bounces all over the place. It's I think it's because I was always trying to find what that secret sauce was, and to this day, damn it, I still don't think I've found it, but I'll persevere.
So I've noticed that in a previous interview you mentioned Ron Smith.
Mm-hmm.
as being an artist whose Dredd work you admire. He's one of those artists who I think generally, when people are naming the definitive, for want of a better phrase, Dredd artists, he doesn't necessarily make that kind of top 5, which is odd because of the sheer number of stories that he illustrated, kind of the key, the key characters, people like Otto Sump, the early version of Marlon Shakespeare and all this thing of it. Do you see a lot of Ron Smith in your Dredd work?
I don't know. I don't think I see. I don't think I see his art influencing mine. I think the reason I'm so in admiration of him, though, is I think that he brought a level of skill to drawing Dredd and detail that, and he was delivering a lot of Dredd. I mean, he was. He was the one that who was always there. I get, without having been there, I get the feeling he was probably the one who hit his deadlines the most, but a very, very, very high level of draftsmanship, which I was just in awe of what he was putting into the work, and I think there was good storytelling. So I think if we're talking about what I took from it, it probably was the fact that the storytelling was very sound in it.
The kind of stories that you were doing, this is like a transitional period for Judge Dredd, where you're going from John Wagner and Alan Grant had pretty much walked away by this point, but from where John Wagner was the primary writer to where Garth Ennis is taking over, and then you get Grant Morrison and Mark Miller coming on, and your time on the strip kind of tracks over the top of that. Was there a feeling that things were changing? As somebody who'd read 2000 AD, at the time, did you think, well, this is slightly tonally different?
I mean, it did feel different to me. It was slightly strange in that I had such a strong imprint from where Dredd had come from, and I think we all did good work back then. But I think what's interesting is that there were more liberties taken with something that had, up to that point, one of the attractions of Dread as a story was the fact that this world was so well realized, with very clear, story world rules in there that you didn't mess around with. And this is somebody who's, I sound like a massive ingrate here, but one of the reasons I got work was because I think there was room for more humor in the strip and the way it was going. And I also got to draw some amazingly fun stories as well. Magic Mellow is a massive standout for me as I look back over my career. Absolutely loved drawing that one. But I think, maybe we were taking some liberties with the character there. So just looking back, and I'm sure at the time I had a little bit of a sense of that as well. But no, you don't, because you're full of piss and vinegar when you're in your 20s. So you just think, now screw it, they're mine now. So I'm going to do what I want, and I just regret it later then. But
your next major thing for 2000 AD was Robohunter, or more specifically, Mark Millar's reboot of John and Ian's series. Well, what was your take on this? Because it's a strip that elicits some strong opinions.
I am aware, but it's so I don't feel I was drawing the same Robohunter. It's like it's Robohunter from a different dimension. But what a laugh I had drawing that. I loved drawing it. That was insane, that strip. That was nuts. I drew Elvis being decapitated. I had a massive giant robot Mickey Mouse. No, it wasn't Mickey Mouse, but Mickey Mouse, stomping on Sam, and it was nuts, absolutely nuts. So I loved drawing it. But yes, I know that I'll probably be burned at the stake by some Robohunter fans.
Were you kind of aware at the time of the differences between the original what we're doing? Because I mean, Mark's scripts were so much more violent and had a certain degree, and I don't think I'm being unkind here, a certain meanness to them. A certain viciousness.
I think there was a level of naivety on my part with regard to being respectful to something which has the sort of history that it has, which as a fan I would have if I'd stood back from it, I probably would have been far more aware of, because I've still got I've got the original 2000 ADs, but I've also got the collections. I loved Ian Gibson's artwork. I absolutely loved it, and I think it was. I was, like I say, I really enjoyed drawing the strip. I genuinely didn't really feel like I was drawing that Robohunter, and it was maybe that's just a coping mechanism. I don't know, but to your very specific point there, I mean, we were going through a time where comics, on both sides of the Atlantic, were sort of leaning into shock value a lot more. And again, being a little bit older now, being a lot older now, and looking back, I think realistically, I do know that we were maybe not making quality choices all the time about how to do things. And I think, but it was the way the industry was going at the time. It was probably reflective of wider entertainment as well. I mean, it's the time of 80s and 90s action movies, etc. So I think that's what we were doing. But effectively, we were part of that particular piece of pop culture.
It's that period when I mean, this is a whole other podcast other than this, but where you had the kind of the influence of Deadline, and then Toxic, Revolver. So a much more mature comics, but also comics influenced by wider culture. So particularly music. But then as you get into about 93, 94, 95, that kind of lads, I mean, Loaded started in what, 94?
Mhm.
So you're starting to get lads mag culture, that
Mhm.
kind of precursor to the stuff that came later. With things like Robohunter and let's talk about it as well, Babe Race 2000. Just to get another strip that elicits strong opinions. Do you think that was 2000 AD just reflecting what was kind of out there in the wider culture?
I think there was a little bit of flailing around to try and find a way to fit in to like you say, that sort of lad culture. I did try and approach that's something that strip I do have some misgivings about. I did try and approach it with my tongue very seriously in my cheek and just go so ridiculously overboard on it that it goes beyond, any doubt that this is anything other than a parody. I mean, but I have to say it's, I think that, that the problem with something like that is I don't think it delivered enough substance to justify what we were doing. I think and let's be honest, everybody's careers are full of stuff like that. I would love to have drawn Watchmen over and over and over again. But something like that. Probably I was falling out of love with the idea of doing, actually 2000 AD stuff at that point. I was falling out of love with it because I was being pushed hard on deadlines. I was often doubling up because I needed to. That's what I was having to hack out some dreads then as well at the same time. Because for whatever reason they needed me to jump in, and it was probably, like I say, the love was going a little bit at that point.
Because rereading your stuff, and really this period kind of up to about 94 are the only old progs that I've kept.
Mm-hmm.
They were the first regular ones I had. Color Commandos,
Mm-hmm.
which was Steve Parkhouse, and some of the stuff you were doing with Babe Race 2000. I'm not going to defend that strip, but particularly I'm remembering the kind of very stark Babe Race 2000 cover that you did of the character on a bike, where it's just red and black, and it's just and Color Commanders as well. It feels like that's where things started to click in terms of your style, that you had a confidence in it to be able to experiment a little bit. Because I remember thinking at the time how rich the Color Commander world felt. And then Babe Race 2000, for all of its content, you're then getting covers like that where you're clearly going, what, I can play around with this.
Yeah.
Well, I'm wondering if this is all in my reading and all in my head, or whether for you that kind of process of beginning to maybe feel like you were growing out of it, or
yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that's fair. I mean, I think there is with Cola Commandos, I think it was really beginning to go somewhere, and I would have loved to have had an opportunity to do something similar, because I love drawing stories like that, which are so off the wall and going to take you in directions even as an artist you're not expecting, and it's and to draw, the hero of the piece is, the biggest sort of like normal person, well, even less so than that, the most downtrodden person he could possibly be, and to me that really appealed to me, and I think there was something about that story that gave me the freedom to do it, and I really enjoyed that. I think when you're talking about the Babe Race 2000 stuff, I think that's more a case of trying to find some, the opportunities there. It was because that was a story that actually asked me to deliver in a certain way, which is that sort of like overblown, over the top sort of, what US comics were doing at the time, and just dial it up to 11 basically. And it's but there were opportunities in there to actually start to bring a sense of design into it, and just to actually start to experiment a bit, and to allow other influences to come into my work as well, I think.
How did you feel at this point? I mean, you've already mentioned, beginning to fall out of love with 2000 AD stuff a little bit. Were you happy with where things were going? Were you discontented? Because around the time you started to get US work.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. I mean, the terrible thing is that so many of us at that time probably were looking across the Atlantic, and you do, because it's part of the wish fulfillment, that you want to go and work for Marvel and DC, So I think I was beginning to get the opportunities, starting to get stuff coming through there, which was great and wonderful. I was beginning to feel like this again, unfortunately, it's a bit of a theme in certain parts of my career where it was like, oh, we know he can do it, so we're just going to throw this over there. Oh, you've got a week. Here's an extra 20 quid a page, but you've got a week. And I wasn't resolute enough to say, no, I'm not doing that one. And I think that does take some of the shine off it then as well, So it was a little bit like that at the time. But I mean, looking back at that period, I absolutely loved, the stuff I was doing, and I never wanted to ever walk away from 2000 AD. I always, I have so much admiration for it as a like I say, as a weekly magazine. I think, and the history of it. That I think there's some truth in what you're saying, in that some shine does go off it, but that was for a multitude of reasons. I think I don't think it's for any one thing. And to your point, I was looking at to go and do US work as well.
Because so often 2000 AD is particularly in the 90s, can be unfairly characterized as a stepping stone. People just got work because they wanted to get a portfolio to go off to America. But it's as you say, you kind of can't separate out industries really from the community, because ultimately, if you are interested in creating comics, American comics, DC, Marvel, Image, by that point, certainly a part of the comics DNA. You can't separate that out. I mean, I'm guessing you didn't really think of it in those terms. I can get work here and then go on to American comics. It was just how things turned out.
No, I mean, it was, and you get opportunities, and one thing leads to another, and I think, once I started getting the US work, again, being able to deliver on time, it was serving me well, and I was, and it was a time where they were always interested in trying out new people, and you would get a decent run at it, and so I, started doing that, and frankly, they pay better as well. I mean, it's not great money, it wasn't for me. I timed my US invasion right after everything imploded, so perfect timing. It was. I think it was a new and exciting opportunity. That's a big part of it, because we do these things because we love them. I mean, I hit my, we can come on to the bit later on where I fell out of love with comics, but at this point, I mean, I was absolutely loving the fact that this is a career that's growing. I had opportunities for work that were coming in from both Marvel and DC, and I think it was just that sort of natural progression there.
The kind of culmination of this period in your time at 2000 AD is around Big Dave and the Summer Offensive. Now, this was a Steve Parkhouse strip that you were brought in on. Again, very strong opinions. I feel like I'm saying this for every strip that we're talking about. and for so many, Big Dave was the epitome of that kind of laddish culture that came in with Mark and Grant and the editors, because John Tomlinson and Alan McKenzie had taken over. I think they were job sharing at this point. I just want to get your views and your memories of Big Dave.
Yeah, that's another interesting one, in that was like having to dive in and do something very, very quickly. Plus, whereas I hadn't really been intimidated by taking over from a lot of artists or rotating with other artists, even though I knew they were better than me, Steve Parkhouse was doing much, much better than me what I wanted to do personally myself, and that's really, really difficult. Whereas other artists, that's fine. I don't really want to draw like that. You're amazing, but I don't want to draw like that. Oh, bloody hell, I really want to draw like that. So I actually found that was the toughest part of that job, to be perfectly honest. It was, it was a strange strip. It felt like an anomaly, like a massive anomaly, but it had its moments, though. I mean, I got to draw Robert Maxwell.
It's fascinating to see the transition from Parkhouse to you. What were the qualities in Parkhouse's work that you so admired?
It goes back to what I was saying before about body language and storytelling and inhabiting the character. I think, I was looking at Bo Jeffrey's saga again, and it's that it's owning the characters and owning that story. And I think he and even though I think he was quite sketchy on Big Dave, as I recall, it wasn't with the same sort of detail, but there was a fluidity to it and just a very natural drawing that really appeals to me when I see an artist able to do that. You're talking about my humor roots. I mean, you can see that's in his work as well. It's very, very clearly in everything that he does.
And with a character like Big Dave, were you? Well, you know what? Actually, thinking about you and Steve Parkhouse's work, you're if one can have a spectrum of different styles at 2000 AD, you two are probably the closest together in that part of that kind of cartoony style. And you'd been alternating with people like Casanovas on Robohunter, so very different style to yours. But it seems obvious that if Steve can't do it, how you were drawing in the 90s is exactly the style that should take over the strip. I mean, I didn't notice it at the time, but you are right. I mean, I genuinely, it was only with hindsight looking back, I like I said a little earlier, is that I realized how important humor in my work is, and how and having a level of absurdity in it is how much I enjoy that, and it's because when you're knee deep in doing this stuff, I mean, you're going with what your gut tells you to do, and I guess that's the case of the editor saying it's the obvious person to put on there, like you say, and I mean, I think I've always felt slightly off kilter with a lot of what's in 2000 AD, but I don't think that's a bad thing, and I think that's one of its strengths, because there are other artists that are slightly off kilter or massively off kilter in other directions, so I think it's being able to have that sort of anthology feel, has, like I say, it has always been the strength of it, and what made it exciting for me when I was a kid. So yes, it means that sometimes you're doing work which can be polarizing, but it's refreshing that there is a publication out there that actually enables you to do that. Sometimes you've got to question why you're doing something like that, and is it a cynical reason, or is it because you're actually trying to test the boundaries? That I will say that's for others to judge. Let's talk a little bit about American comics, because you did stuff on Batman and Superman, and so this was the very late 90s, 98, 99. And this, and you've mentioned this elsewhere. This was where that triangle of good, nice, and quick came to bite you on the ass, really, didn't it? Do you want to explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I was like I say, I don't miss deadlines. I've really worked hard all my career. Whatever I was doing was to ensure that I hit a deadline, and sometimes that's a fool's errand. It really is. It's in comics anyway. It's because boy, people will abuse you for that, and it's that's I got the chance to do good work. I've got stuff that I did which I slaved over, which I'm so proud of. I also got the chance to draw characters that I really wanted to draw, but in situations that I wish I hadn't put myself in. Which is, I did a 4-part Batman story, Batman Toyman, which I literally was doing a book a week there. I was cranking them out. But I was inked by Klaus Janson, Sal Buscema, Aaron Sode, and who's the other one? Oh, and Flint Henry. And it was it was amazing. Amazing to see my work being inked by them. I just wasn't happy with my work underneath their inks. But again, there's no ingratitude here, because people were giving me work. I was doing well out of it. I was working for both Marvel and DC at the same time. I literally had a regular monthly book with both publishers. I got the chance to do some stuff. And DC in particular really stepped up and gave me the opportunity to try and put my stamp on the comic industry, doing things like Fate and Scare Tactics. And the Legends of the Dark Knight stuff I did, and the DC Elseworlds I did. That was like, no, take your time, do good work. We're going to give you a good rate and everything. I look back at that stuff, and I remember the joy of doing it. The problem was they didn't sell, and because they were unknown books. I had a long run, 20 issues odd on Fate, and 12 or 14 issues on Scare Tactics. Nobody bought them, and but they gave me the opportunity to do other work at DC and Marvel. But by then I wasn't on regular books. I was doing whatever was available. I'd get X-Men, I'd get Superman. I'm not complaining about that, but it was always deadline saving, and you do the best you can with that, and then that deadline saving becomes the way it is, and the editors really appreciate the fact you'll do it, and they pay you well to do it, etc. But it's always with your back to the wall, and it just burns you out after a while. All that love I had for comics was fast dissipating at that point.
When you're being a penciler, having in the 2000 AD style done penciling and inking and colouring before. Did that bleed some of the fun out of it, or was it a relief to be rid of those extra processes?
It would depend. I absolutely love doing everything end to end. That's what I do now. I absolutely, that's my ideal way of working. However, I worked with Andy Lanning most of the time on my US career. And we've been mates since the very beginnings of our careers, and we still work closely together now as well. So and he knew what I wanted, and I could lean into what I knew he was going to bring to the work as well. So that actually made it quite an enjoyable experience. So I think in that instance that was great. There was some work that you would get coming back that would you just throw your hands up in horror, and you go, what the are you even looking at what I penciled there, but then there were other ones where like I was saying about that Batman Toyman thing. Like I say, I'm not crazy about my pencils there, but to be inked by those legends is amazing. I had Tom Palmer, who I grew up reading his his Dracula inked over Gene Colan. He's inking me on 2 deluxe edition Elseworld stories. That was such a dream. So it swings and roundabouts. I mean, generally, I would rather do the whole thing myself. You've got to make compromises, though. I mean, it's the vagaries of a regular schedule, I guess.
Out of all of the creators who went from working at 2000 AD to working on American comics, yours, particularly at that point, was probably the closest I would have associated with kind of classic American comic book style of art. In that I can see a bit of Neil Adams, I can see a bit of Ditko, I can see a bit of Buscema in there as well. Was that transition easy for you?
Yes, in so much as then I'm tapping into that inner 12-year-olds, that the artists you just said I would still hold up as being my gold standard. So I still would now, and that actually goes back to my point earlier about not having the underpinnings of understanding the structure of drawing, in the way that I would have wanted to earlier in my career. And I think this is where it was all beginning to come together. Where there was now a level of technical ability that I could bring to bear that I then layered on top of, and I think that is I think that's a very good observation you made there with regard to the specific artists you said as well, for different reasons. I mean, John Buscema, definitely for that fluidity of his work, and just the fact, just the sense that the pencil touched the paper and these beautifully realized figures just appeared, even if they're just simple strokes. He understands gesture of a figure, better than anybody, I think. Neil Adams for bringing that level of extra cinematic flair to something. I'm pushing it as well. I'm really pushing it. And then somebody like Ditko, who's just like let's just make this crazy. Let's see what else we can do with it. So yeah, I love those artists and many others for those sort of reasons. And yes, they definitely did influence my work, because the fanboy never goes away. And one of the reasons why I wanted to be drawing Marvel comics is because of the stuff that I read as a kid. So give me one of those characters that they were drawing. I hated it when you had a character redesign. I don't want to draw the character redesign. I want to draw the character the way it was when I read it.
You came to American comics, as you alluded to a moment ago, at a time when sales were dropping. You'd had the boom of the 90s, and things as we were progressing towards the millennium were getting quite desperate for a lot of comics titles. And it's a theme that we've returned to again and again on the podcast, is timing and fortune, luck, if you will. And it feels to a certain extent that you've had to make your own luck in a way that I don't think. Everyone's worked hard. Everyone's got to a place, and they've done the work and put the time in, and sometimes there's serendipity at work, and things click together. But I'm thinking back to the 16-year-old who presents himself at the comic book office, and then it's another 6 years before he gets work. I'm thinking about the artist now who stands at just before the turn of the century, having to reevaluate where this work has got you, where you are. Do you get a sense of that? The kind of
oh no, I'm very aware of it. It's I think I lent into being a grafter a lot. But I also there are broader parts to my personality which comics were beginning to stifle as well. But the realities were, at this point, I've got 3 little kids, I've got a mortgage, You've got to pay the bills, and hey, there are worse jobs in the world. So I was still enjoying it. Not like I said, it was slowly dissipating, that joy, but yes, I mean, and there was a lot of hustling. There was a hell of a lot of hustling going on then, and then I mean, as we talk about, as I'm sort of like coming out of that, where I was getting the chance to do fill-ins on some of the big name books, which in the end, ironically looking back, that was the beginning of the end then. But I think coming out of that, there's a period where the hustling was more painful because of the sort of books that I was then saying, oh, well, I've still got to put food on the table, so I'm going to do these books, So, that's when I started going back more into the licensed artwork side with DC, which again, I mean, fun to do, but not nourishing as an artist. So I think there is a level of my timing sucked breaking America, but and it probably would have been different, if I'd done it, 3, 4, 5 years previously, because I just think you get ahead of steam there. Whereas it was survival of the fittest to a certain degree when I was doing it, and I was a good artist, but I didn't bring the sort of flair that maybe other artists did. So I mean, being the jobbing artist, it can be difficult, yeah.
Because did you do anything on Overkill? Any of that kind of last generation Marvel UK stuff? I can't remember.
I did Gunrunner. That was the thing I did on there. Which that was, and I did one issue of Death's Head, but beyond that. So I didn't do a huge amount there. It was at that point, I think I was probably doing 2000 AD stuff? So I think, to be honest, it was kind of like I'd chosen sides. So
it's fascinating. You look at the names involved in comics at that period and the different places that have gone. Because obviously Liam Sharp, has gone on to be Liam Sharp. But Dermot Power, who we had on the podcast a little while ago, he went on to work in movies, and I remember thinking at the time, and I loved Overkill. It was hit me at exactly the. I mean, it was what, 94. So I was.
I'm going to take your word for it.
Yeah, I was 16. So that was kind of a sweet spot for me. But I remember thinking at the time, there's a definite Marvel UK camp, a definite 2000 AD camp by that point. And it's interesting that just prior to that point, you had switched over to the other side. I mean, were you conscious of that at the time?
Well, yeah. Here's the thing: I was in the 2000 AD camp with regard to where I was working and being given fantastic opportunities. All my social life was on the Marvel UK camp, because those are the people, like I say, we'd all kind of started at the same time. And but no, at that point, Marvel UK also had an in-house studio, so a lot of those people were all sitting at drawing boards next to each other. 94, I'd moved back to Wales after the birth of my first child, so that put me in a different position as well then. So I think thinking about it, that's probably one of the big reasons, because I was, like I say, it was great. 2000 AD was going gangbusters. Beginning to get a bit of American work soon after that. So I think that's where that kind of happened. But like I say, I mean, those were all the people that I started out with.
Tell us about what happened on New Year's Day in 2000.
I had a hell of a hangover. It was well, the world didn't come to an end, which was good. So that was a good start to the day. But I had for quite some time, I'd been thinking about the way my life had been going in comics, and I had some frustrations on a couple of levels. One was what I was saying about becoming this very much this sort of like jobbing go-to artist. But the other part of it was had ambitions to actually do something that was more than just drawing. To actually, I wanted to build a business, and so I'd been, for a few years, been thinking about what sort of studio I would set up. I then was thinking, I know there's a love for comics that goes way beyond the comic reading public, and okay, now it's insane, but even back then it was, people had a warmth and a fondness for comics. Now, to a certain degree, a lot of people had sort of rather misty-eyed, cliched views of comics, but I knew there was a market for comic art outside of comics itself. So I wanted to come up with a studio, and I needed to hang this on something. So I think the thing you're alluding to is on New Year's Day, wandering down to the beach with a raging hangover, and coming up with the name The Comic Stripper, and effectively that was the beginnings of my studio there. So having come up with the name, I then came up with the plan to go with it, and it was effectively to try and muscle in a little bit on the other creative industry, the other creative opportunities in advertising and marketing, on the fringes of entertainment at that time. But it was primarily advertising and marketing that I wanted to get in on. I think I felt that comics I think I was aware enough to know that comics, chews people up. It really does, and everybody has a shelf life, and you should respect the fact you have a shelf life and be sure that you got a plan B. So to a certain degree, this was my plan B. So I set up a studio. I removed my name wasn't part of the studio. I implied it was a studio of illustrators, but it was me with a multitude of styles and a portfolio in these various styles. So I that started in 2000, and there's an obvious transition period, where I'm still doing a little bit of work for Marvel and DC, starting to do quite a bit of licensed work for DC, which was much easier time-wise than doing, the sort of regular superhero monthly books. They're shorter stories. You're leaning in on, going back to what we were saying about Ghostbusters, you're leaning in on a very established style guide. And once you get the muscle memory, you can really tear through those things as well, So I just started building the studio up at this point, and started to reach out and build a different audience for my work, basically.
It's a link back to your first comics work, which was in licensed properties.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a different kind of licensing. It used to be that to get kids interested in a toy, companies would
Mm-hmm.
make get Marvel or whoever to make a comic out of it. But comic art, as we moved into the 21st century, seems much more embedded in mainstream culture. You see it a lot more.
Oh yeah,
just stuff for kids.
I mean, definitely, and it's way beyond the selling of the toy, because that was actually very little of my early work. I was creating comic strips for insurance companies, for mobile phone companies, for things like that, as training tools, that sort of thing. And it actually, it opened my eyes quite a bit, and it made me realize how many opportunities there are out there, and you can go out and create them as well, and it's once you start to build your sort of standard pitch for saying, well, you can use this as the absolute best tool for being able to communicate with your audience, whether that audience is in-house, your team, whether that audience is your customer that you're trying to get out to, so public service messages, I drew a hell of a lot of those. So there are all sorts of things, a lot of opportunities like that, and a lot of advertising and marketing. I remember an early job was Virgin Atlantic, for their upper class service. They wanted it was a giveaway to their customers as they came on board. It was a calendar full of superheroes, of all the various superhero Virgin staff who work on the flights, and it is parodies of that. And actually, I found very quickly that I had more creative control doing that than I ever did working in mainstream comics, because they lean in on you so much more. Then it's like, well, we don't know how to do this shit, so so I started writing them as well. So I've written a lot of stuff, over the last 20 years since I started doing that. So some of it can be, less than thrilling. Like I say, doing stuff for an insurance company is you're looking for the fun, but that's fine, So that all came from a raging hangover, New Year's Day 2000.
Do you, based on what you've just said about the opportunities that opened up by doing that, do you feel that sometimes comics can be too self-referential, too much of a bubble?
Yeah, no, definitely. And one of the reasons is we all love them so much, and we because I still want to draw Spider-Man. I still want to draw all those characters that I grew up loving. So it hasn't left me now, and I'm just sensible enough now to say, don't do it, just don't do it. But I can draw. If I find an opportunity to draw it for the sheer pleasure of it, I'll do it. But I think what that means, though, is that first off, we're kind of sitting ducks to the big companies to I don't actually. I should qualify this, because I've been out of the business for a long time, so I can't say this is necessarily the case now. But it felt to me like they knew I wanted to be there and I wanted to do that. It wasn't a specific they. There's nobody Machiavellian sort of rubbing their hands together going, ha ha ha, we've got him now. But just generally that's how it worked. You love the characters and you're going to come in and you're going to do it. And if you don't want to do it, there'll be somebody else who wants to do it. And so it means that it's an industry that it does a lot of, it doesn't look out into the bigger world enough. It does a lot of navel gazing. I think the state of the industry to a certain degree is a result of that, is that we perpetuate the comic industry that we grew up with. And I think it really worries me, because I absolutely love comics, that there is so much quality stuff coming out, and I'm not necessarily talking about from the bigger comic companies now, but there are at least avenues for people to be able to put out great stuff, but we seem to have failed to actually find a big enough audience for this to be treated with the sort of respect it should be treated as an art form. So that I think comes from the fact that we're all such fans of the medium that we work in, and whether we end up as artists, writers, editors, or whatever, I think we tend to perpetuate that then, and I have been trying to think really hard as what breaks that cycle, what allows us to break out from that.
Because it's something that I'm pretty sure we've sort of touched on in the past in the podcast, which is, when comic book characters and culture are such, well, they're $1 billion industry,
mm-hmm.
and yet comics themselves haven't necessarily seen the benefit from that. Though, there's a lot to be said that for the fact that the big two and what we consider mainstream comics is actually a small bubble on the side of
mm-hmm.
A much bigger industry that we don't necessarily know about. So I guess that's kind of the area that you're trying to unpick. How do we unleash the potential of an industry that has spawned something so big?
Well, the thing is, I think it's. We kind of. I talked about how I started my studio, and it was just me initially, and then I grew it, and then I got the opportunity to work in a lot of different industries across, whether it be entertainment or consumer or whatever. And I ended up working for a large technology company in the US, running a studio there. And the thing that I come away with from all of this is that there are two things that rule every single piece of entertainment that's put out. And one is how do you distribute it, and how do you monetize it? And comics singly haven't been able to find the new way to do that. And technology moves on, and yes, you can deliver the comic content on the new technology, but for whatever reason, we've never found a way to be able to massively lift it up to the mainstream. Yes, people love the IP. They absolutely love the IP. We're born with it in our DNA. I mean, genuinely, can you remember not knowing Spider-Man existed? I mean, it's just there. It is just a part of the fabric of life. So it shows the power of it, but and the monetization of it is huge, but it's not from comics publishing. So that's the problem to solve there. And like I say, and I think that comes down to what is the correct distribution method that allows you to monetize it in a way that the audience want to consume it, and they want to be, and they're basically willing to stump up for it. Which I personally, I'm not seeing what that is yet, and now that I'm thinking about it again for various reasons, it's a big problem. It's a big issue, and I do worry because people we all work. To go back to my point, we all work in this industry because we love it so much, and if it's slowly withering on the vine, or maybe it's mutating into something new, something different, and maybe if the big publishers end up going away a bit, I mean, that's what we need. Maybe it's the rise of the small publisher, the micro publisher, but something needs to happen to change the way comics work as a business model at the moment.
I mean, talking about new ventures and different way of doing things, you alluded to this a moment ago. In 2012, you started on something fairly major, and that precipitated a complete change of venue, didn't it?
Yes, it did. Yes, a bit unexpected. It all seems like a strange fever dream now, but So I mean, like I said, create a lot of comic book content for people over the last, from 2000 to 2012. It was most of my client work by then was US based rather than UK, and then funny enough, through Andy Lanning, I was introduced to a gentleman who wanted to create his own IP for some music that he was doing. He wanted to create an Archie's type band for this music. He had a little side project that was this tech company he was trying to get off the ground, which I then ended up having some discussions and doing some work around that, which then somehow mutated into a multi-billion-dollar tech company. When I started talking to him, there were only about 8 people there. I ended up going over to the US, taking my studio over there, building the studio up inside this company as we grew. It's Magic Leap, by the way, if anybody wants to go and look it up. It's not a big secret. Ran a big content studio there, multidiscipline, which was new for me. So, that helped me understand a lot more about the whole pipeline of putting out multimedia, multi-channel content. We made some amazing award-winning mixed reality content that go on the device that the company make. And so I was in Florida from 2015 on full time, but I've been going there since 2012 until lockdown, when I hot-footed it back to the UK. And then unfortunately, lockdown kind of did for my side of the company, which was the consumer entertainment side. So it turns out I'm not going back now. But no, it's all good. I mean, it's I think again, it was time for a change. It was time to move on to the next thing. And I'm looking to just build a new studio. Look at what I did before. Learn from your mistakes. Plenty of those to learn from. Quite a big book. and I'll, yes, the next adventure now.
How did you find going from being a freelancer to essentially being a company man, somebody who had to attend meetings, for example?
And well, so there's one aspect of it I was fine with. I mean, like I say, I ran a studio before. I understood about how you've got to network out to clients, etc. I understand the nuts and bolts of doing all that. The bit that I did find very, very strange was when it's your own studio, every penny that gets spent, you're very aware of. When you work for a company and you're salaried, I find that quite uncomfortable. I prefer the motivation of actually going out and doing this, because in the end, the bottom line, it stops with me. So that was the biggest struggle I had, and it also, the company, by its very nature, by the fact that it grew as fast as it did, became very corporate, and the idea of having a comic book artist, being part of the executive suite in a company is kind of funny. But I like to think I brought a bit of colour to the whole thing. But so it was a little strange. It was a bit fish out of water.
And I mean, you mentioned, obviously, unfortunately, things have gone sideways due to the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
What ideas have you got? What direction is there now? Were you ready to, as you alluded to, make that next leap?
Well, the beauty of the job that I had there was the CEO totally got the whole creative aspect of what we were doing. Absolutely loves creative. He's an amazing guy. He's an absolute polymath, and he understands the technology, but loves the idea of, okay, if we're making the most amazing, groundbreaking technology in the world, what are we going to do with it? That's the important thing. It's not the technology for the sake of it. So in the early days, it was myself, Andy Lanning, like I say, I would still work with him. We would go over there and we would be spitballing crazy ideas as to what, where the world is going technology wise. And I've seen so much of this stuff actually beginning to happen. It's it's so exciting and slightly scary. I mean, the world is changing dramatically, and the situation we're in now with COVID-19 is just going to accelerate it. So I've spent the last few years thinking about nothing other than, where is entertainment going? How are we going to consume and digest content in the future? How has the audience changed? Because we no longer want to consume our content the same way. I mean, the fact of the matter is, attention spans are all over the place, for better or worse. I mean, I think it's because we have so much that we can get hold of. I think that's one of the big reasons why that's happening. But we can actually start to tell different stories as well. And the bit that I was really getting excited about was that, seeing the idea that this, the world is turning into a far more of a transmedia world now. You expect your stories to be able to live across multiple platforms. You expect to be able to just pull your entertainment from the ether, no matter where you are. We all, that's how we live our lives now. Entertain me right now. Okay, got it. Go. So I'm bringing all that out of this. It's not like I left on bad terms. I didn't burn the building down. So this is something that I'm planning, albeit on a much smaller scale and more skewed to what I want to do personally, is to continue to build on that. I'll go back to my roots a lot more, in that I wasn't being hands-on as a creative at all for the last 5 years, and that was frustrating. But so I'm back at the drawing board. I mean, I think I'm looking at the little window there. You can see it in the background. It's not just there for stage dressing. So that's fun, and that's really interesting. I'm beginning to build up a team that I can call on to actually start to look to get some content out there. Not 100% certain what that will be, but yeah. So it's kind of exciting at the moment.
I realised that we didn't talk about the VCs.
Oh yes.
But it provides a little bit of continuity because Dan Abnett revived the Jerry Finley Day strip, and it I think if any strip, and you worked on Sinister Dexter with him as well, but I think if any strip kind of was suited to your style, it's probably the VC. was that because when was that? 2002. So this kind of carried on in those initial years where you were working on the marketing and the licensing stuff. Was this keeping your hand in? Was it?
It was 100%. This is my fun. This is the thing I'm doing because it goes back to what I was saying. Once a comic artist, always a comic artist. You can't turn it off. And I needed a fix, and I needed something to do, and it was such a pleasure doing that. It really was. Sometimes, I was really because of what I was trying to do, I was squeezed on time, and I wished I hadn't been the way I was. But most of the time, because you have a set number of episodes, you could work around that. Dan always provided me with really great scripts to draw there, which I really enjoyed. I'm going to go back and, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, the storytelling and the character work I could do in that, especially as I really warmed up to it. Some of the early stuff, again, hey, look, I'm taking over from another artist, never been in that position before. But so some of the early stuff was a little bit more stilted for that reason, as I tried to find my feet. But as I grew into the characters, I do take a huge sense of ownership over something when I'm getting to draw it for a long period of time. And I love doing all that stuff. It was great. And I did a little interview piece because I know there's a VCs thing coming out soon. And I think one of the spoiler here, one of the questions in there was, because I loved everything about doing the VCs, but was there anything that I hated? And it was like those bloody sticky out bits on the helmets. But apart from that, it was great because different angles. Oh, nightmare! Absolute nightmare.
That's one of my favourite bits from the original. So
Yeah, I know. Likewise. I mean, I loved it when somebody else was drawing them.
Brilliant. So, being at this point, and having been in a very changed industry over the past few decades, there's no longer really that much of an opportunity for a 16-year-old to walk into the offices of a comic book publisher. You've got shows that are full of people making their own comics, not necessarily relying on mainstream publishers. But also, you, as we discussed, you've got the embedding of comic book iconography and mythology in mainstream culture. As you look back on your career, how do you feel about it? What are your emotions about that?
I love it. I mean, I genuinely. I mean, I think I have no regrets and nothing but good thoughts. Yeah, of course there were bumpy bits along the way and frustrations, and obviously we talk about those because they are significant points within a career. But the amount of time, when I look back, the amount of time I was just having a great time, and I'm still just having a great time, is that's 99% of the time, and I do love the challenge. I mean, I genuinely do. So if something is needs to be changed, if I need to go in a new direction, well, so be it. I look forward to it. That's part of that's the adrenaline of it. Then So I honestly, I mean, I can tell you that one of the best moments of my life ever. Better be careful. I've got like 3 grown-up kids now, so they can beat me up. But it was wonderful, each of them being born. But being told that I got my first dread was just one of the most phenomenal. I got a sneaky heads-up phone call from John Tomlinson one night and said, "Richard's going to call you in the morning." So I was bouncing off the walls then, and I I can still get that feeling, when something is going, maybe not to that degree, but when something is going well creatively, or or I'm building something, I'm trying to achieve something, and it happens, and it doesn't go away. I genuinely, I've had a fantastic career up to this point, and this isn't a retrospective. I'm only part way through it as well, so just want to point that out.
It's a very important point to make as well.
Yes.
So great to hear from Anthony. Thank you to him for spending so much time to chat away. If you want to catch up with his work on Dread, then there's obviously the complete case files, and also you can find his work in many of the digital collections that are available from the 2000 AD web shop and apps. We are going to be back in a week's time for more from the Galaxy's Greatest podcast. So until then, I hope you're all staying safe, and as always, Splundig Verthrig.
Alert! 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 Fill power levels dangerously high. Alert! Alert! Read 2000 AD every week. Ask your comic book store or newsagent now. Subscribe to the Galaxy's Greatest Comic at 2000ADonline.com.